We don't serve people who look like they can't pay. The waitress didn't whisper it. She pointed at the old man like he was dirt on her floor. Franklin Boyd stood there quietly, his fingers still stained with grease from a morning spent fixing his neighbor's truck. He didn't argue. He didn't flinch. People watched, some with smirks, others recording. Not one stepped in. But moments later, a black SUV slammed to a stop outside. The doors flew open. Out stepped a decorated army officer in full dress uniform. He stormed into the diner, eyes scanning the room. Then came the question that silenced everyone. Which one of you threw out the man with the dirty hands? The room fell silent, and suddenly everyone realized too late what those greasy hands had meant. Franklin Boyd's house sat at the edge of a sleepy rural town, nestled behind a row of overgrown cedar trees that hadn't been trimmed in years. The paint on the siding had faded into a soft gray blue, and the porch steps creaked with every shift in weight. But the garage beside the house was spotless. It was his sanctuary. Metal shelves lined the walls, each tool meticulously hung, every bolt and washer sorted into glass jars. A rusted sign overhead read Boyd's Auto, Eastern 1984, though there hadn't been a customer invoice written in over a decade. Franklin didn't advertise. He didn't need to. Folks around town knew where to go when their engine wouldn't turn over or a bike chain came loose. And Franklin never charged for what he could do in under an hour, especially not for the kids. Every afternoon, a small parade of teenagers wandered into his yard with dented skateboards, bent bike wheels, or squeaky brakes on their first beat-up cars. They didn't always know his name, just called him Mr. Boyd, or sometimes Sir, without really knowing why. He showed them how to adjust brake calipers, how to listen to an engine instead of just guessing. He taught them patience, precision, and pride in doing something right. He never bragged, never mentioned Vietnam or medals or military service. That life was a shadow he kept folded in a box at the back of his bedroom closet. Around here, he was just the guy with the grease-stained hands and the steady voice. No one asked about the limp in his left leg. No one had ever seen him cry, except maybe his dog Duke, who'd passed the year before. Each morning began the same. Franklin would shuffle into his small kitchen turn on the old coffee pot, one of those that made a hiss before it gurgled, and pour exactly 2 cups, one for him and one for Sarah. He'd set her cup down across the table from his, just like he used to when she was alive. Sometimes he'd speak softly to her picture on the wall framed in walnut, taken during their anniversary trip to the Smokies in '93. "Morning, darlin'. Gonna be a warm one today," he'd murmur, staring at the steam curling off the ceramic mug. "I fixed that Martinez boy's clutch yesterday. You'd have liked that. Reminded me of Tommy when he first started working the shop." The silence that followed wasn't lonely. It was full of memory, of habit, of years stitched together by shared breakfasts and quiet understanding. Franklin didn't have much in the way of money, but what he gave this town, stability, dignity, quiet care, couldn't be measured in dollars. Most didn't know they were in the presence of someone who had once risked his life for people he'd never met. But that was all right by him. He preferred it that way. The bell above the door jingled softly as Franklin Boyd stepped into the Maple Lane Diner, same as he had every Thursday morning for nearly a decade. The place hadn't changed much. Faded green booths lined the windows. A pie display case stood half-filled near the register, and the same bottomless coffee, $1. 25 chalkboards stood tilted in the corner. He liked that it was quiet, local, familiar. Franklin paused just inside the doorway, taking a deep breath and scanning the room. Most of the early risers didn't look up. A couple of older men near the back were sipping from chip mugs and staring into the middle distance, half listening to the soft hum of a radio playing classic country. But others looked. Amber Collins, the young waitress with her perfectly ironed ponytail and a notepad already in hand, spotted him immediately. She was new, maybe had worked there for 3-4 months at most. Didn't know him the way others did. Didn't know anything beyond what she saw. A wiry old man in work boots, faded jeans, and a flannel shirt, with sleeves rolled up to his forearms, hands still bearing the stains of a lifetime under car hoods. Franklin walked quietly to the counter, choosing the stool farthest from anyone else. He always ordered the same thing: coffee, rye toast, and 2 soft eggs. He didn't need a menu. Amber approached, chewing her gum as she looked him over. Her nose crinkled. Tables for paying customers, she said loudly enough that two teenagers at a nearby booth looked up from their phones. Franklin cleared his throat gently. Just coffee and toast, he said. His voice was low, respectful, as if he hadn't heard the edge in hers. Amber stared at his hands. God, what is that? Oil, she stepped back like something had bitten her. You couldn't wash before coming in here. A couple at the window booth turned their heads. One of them, a man in a sports coat, smirked. The other chuckled softly. Somewhere behind Franklin, a phone camera clicked to life. I did wash, Franklin said, almost apologetically. But it's hard to get it all out. It's just from fixing junkers. Amber cut in, folding her arms. Well, sir, we serve food here. Real food. And customers who don't look like they just crawled out from under a tractor. There was laughter now, muted, awkward, but no one stopped her. Franklin looked down at his hands. Yes, the creases were darkened with old oil. No matter how hard he scrubbed, the stains never fully left. The cost of honest labor. He didn't respond. From across the room, a woman sat quietly in the corner booth, stirring her tea. Her name was Jenny Holloway. Years ago, Franklin had helped fix her radiator in the middle of a January snowstorm, refused payment, just handed her the keys and told her to drive safe. Jenny remembered. She remembered everything, but now she said nothing. She watched Amber sneer and shake her head, watched Franklin nod, gently pick up his cap and slide off the stool like a man 20 years older. Amber wasn't done. We don't serve people who look like they can't pay, she said sharply. Loud, certain. So maybe take those greasy hands and go find somewhere else. Someone snorted in amusement. A teenager near the door lifted his phone higher. Franklin turned slowly, cap in hand, and made his way to the exit. His limp was subtle but noticeable. The soles of his boots scraped lightly on the tile floor. No one held the door. No one said a word. Only Jenny blinked hard, throat tightening with guilt. But still, she didn't speak. Franklin stepped into the sunlight, humiliated but silent. Behind him, the door swung shut with a final chime, and the laughter picked back up. The smell of scorched sand and diesel still lingered in Franklin Boyd's memory, decades after he left Iraq behind. It was February 1991, Operation Desert Storm. The Kuwaiti border had just been crossed, and U.S. forces were pressing deep into Iraqi territory. Franklin, then 38, wasn't a frontline soldier in the traditional sense. He wasn't a commander with maps or a sniper with kill counts. He was something else entirely, the guy who could keep everything running when the chaos began. He led a recovery team, 4 Humvees and a flatbed armed with chains, winches, spare transmissions, and raw nerve. When vehicles were disabled, it was Franklin's job to retrieve them. Under fire, in sandstorms. At night, it didn't matter. Get it out or burn, it was the standing order. Franklin always got it out. That night had started like any other. Just past midnight, a call came through the radio, 2 APCs disabled west of Basra. Franklin didn't hesitate. He threw on his flak jacket, checked his sidearm, and as always slipped the same 9-inch wrench into the breast pocket of his uniform. The wrench wasn't regulation, but it had been his good luck charm since his early days turning bolts back home in Missouri. It fit just right in his hand. Still does. The team rolled out across open desert lights, off navigating by stars and compass. They made it 10 miles before the first round hit. The explosion tore through the lead Humvee, flipping it onto its side. Shouts, sparks, fire. Then gunfire lit the horizon, tracer rounds dancing across the dark like angry red fireflies. Ambush, someone shouted, but Franklin already knew. He was out of the truck before the driver could kill the engine, crawling toward the wreckage of the lead vehicle. One man was trapped beneath it, crushed below the axle, screaming in panic. Bullets cracked past him. The smell of cordite filled the air. Franklin didn't flinch. He signaled 2 men to cover fire while he rigged a jack from the second Humvee and shimmied underneath. His hands were bleeding. He didn't feel it. The wrench slipped from his pocket during the crawl. He retrieved it and used it to knock loose the shattered bracket pinning the soldier's leg. It wasn't standard procedure. It wasn't even smart, but it worked. He freed the man, dragged him back behind the second truck, and then doubled back to retrieve the radio from the burning wreck. It took 28 minutes of sustained fire before air support arrived. 2 of Franklin's men were wounded. 1 later lost his arm, but none of them died. When it was over, Franklin stood with his sleeves scorched and uniform torn, cradling the same wrench in his palm. Not a weapon, not a medal, just a tool. But that night it had saved a life. He was awarded the Bronze Star with Valor along with the Army Commendation Medal. The citation read, "Exceptional courage under fire. Demonstrated commitment to duty beyond expectation." But Franklin never mentioned it. Not to his wife, not to his neighbors, and certainly not to the waitress at the diner. He folded the commendations into an envelope and tucked them in a box with old photographs and deployment patches. The wrench, though, that he kept, still hanging on the pegboard above his workbench back home, still stained from the desert, still used to this day. When the local kids asked why it was so old, he just smiled. Good tools age well, he'd say. But to Franklin, it was never just a tool. It was a reminder of what he'd done, of who he'd saved, of who he couldn't. That desert night never left him, and neither did the silence that followed. The call came just as Captain Daniel Boyd was leaving Fort Carson. He had just slipped on his service cap, the stiff navy fabric still crisp from that morning's press, when his phone buzzed with the name Miss Harper flashing across the screen. She never called, not unless it was serious. "Captain Boyd, I'm sorry to bother you." Her voice was trembling, urgent. "It's your father. Something just happened at the Maple Lane Diner. I saw the whole thing from across the street. That waitress threw him out. Loud. Ugly. People laughed. And no one stood up for him." Daniel froze mid-step. He knew his father rarely complained about anything. Even when Daniel was a boy, Franklin had been the kind of man who kept his pride tucked behind grease-stained fingers and a quiet, worn dignity. He never boasted, never pushed, never expected special treatment, not even for serving a country that didn't always thank him. But being humiliated in public, that wasn't just wrong, that was unacceptable. Daniel didn't even hang up properly. He was already in motion, his boots striking sharp against the pavement as he strode to his SUV, heart pounding faster with every flash of memory, his father teaching him how to change oil at age 10. His father sitting in the front row at his West Point graduation. His father standing silently by the flag-draped coffin of a friend who didn't make it back from Iraq. The engine roared as Daniel turned onto Main Street, weaving through light traffic with a jaw set so tight it ached. As he neared the diner, he spotted the worn outline of a familiar figure standing alone by the sidewalk. Franklin's shoulders slumped, staring at the ground with his cap held loosely in one hand. Daniel's throat tightened. He pulled into the parking lot, hard tires squealing slightly as the SUV came to a stop. Doors slammed. Heads turned. Franklin looked up, confusion flickering in his weathered eyes as his son approached, uniform, gleaming metals perfectly aligned. "Danny," he asked, voice cautious. "What are you?" Daniel didn't answer. Not yet. His gaze swept the building chest, rising and falling beneath the weight of decades of loyalty, now tested by a single moment of public shame. "Ms. Harper called me," he said, his voice low but shaking with fury. "Told me what happened. Told me how they looked at you." Franklin tried to wave him off, embarrassed. "Son, it's nothing. Just some rude words, let it go." But Daniel was already moving. "No, sir," he said, jaw clenched. "Not this time." And with that, Captain Daniel Boyd stepped toward the diner dress shoes, tapping hard against the concrete, every movement deliberate, controlled military. He didn't storm in with rage, but with command, with the presence of a man who had led soldiers in battle and would now without hesitation stand up for the man who had taught him what honor really meant. Franklin stayed behind in the lot, heart pounding, hand tightening around his cap. Something was about to change, and this time silence wouldn't win. The bell above the diner door jingled once again, but this time the sound was sharp, clean, final. Captain Daniel Boyd stepped inside with the full presence of a man used to command. His army dress uniform was immaculate ribbons, in perfect alignment insignia, gleaming beneath the warm overhead lights. He didn't shout. He didn't have to. His boots echoed across the linoleum floor, a slow and steady beat that pulled every pair of eyes in the room toward him. Amber Collins looked up from the counter, still mid-wipe on a laminated menu. For a second, she didn't recognize him. Then her gaze flicked to the uniform and froze. The casual murmur of morning conversation dissolved into complete silence. Forks were set down, cell phones lowered. Even the sizzling of bacon on the grill seemed to fade beneath the weight of the moment. Daniel stopped at the counter and placed both hands down gently but firmly. His voice was low, but it carried with surgical precision. "Which one of you," he asked, eyes locked on Amber, threw out the man with the dirty hands. Amber blinked. Her throat bobbed once. She opened her mouth to respond but said nothing. A few people in the booths turned to look at her. She raised a hesitant hand. I didn't know who he was. I just thought—" "You thought what?" Daniel interrupted, still calm, still steel. "That a man's worth is measured by how clean his hands look. That someone with grease under his nails doesn't deserve a seat at a table." He leaned forward slightly. His voice wasn't angry, it was aching. "You judged a man by the stains on his skin. But those stains—" He paused, glancing toward the diner door, where Franklin stood just outside, barely visible through the glass. "Those stains are older than you are. They came from decades of service, not just to his country, but to this town." Amber's eyes darted around, searching for support, but the room had already begun to shift. The patrons, the same ones who had laughed just minutes ago, now looked down at their plates. One man cleared his throat awkwardly. A woman in a blue cardigan rubbed her thumb against her coffee mug and avoided eye contact. Daniel straightened his posture. "Those fingers you mocked once pulled wounded men from burning wreckage in Iraq. He carried soldiers on his back while under fire. He saved lives when others ran. And when he came home, he didn't ask for anything. No special treatment, no medals on display. He just got to work, fixing cars, helping neighbors, living with honor in silence." A hush fell deeper over the room. Even the air felt heavier. At the far side of the diner, a teenager in a hoodie slowly pulled his phone out of his pocket and stared at the screen at the video he had just recorded of Franklin's humiliation. He looked at it for a long moment, then tapped and held the file, and deleted it. Shame flushed his cheeks. Daniel glanced at him, then turned back to Amber. "You didn't just insult my father. You insulted every person who has ever served, then come home to live quietly, honestly. People like him built this country with those same hands. You should be asking him for forgiveness, not offering judgment." Amber's mouth moved, but no sound came out. Her hand lowered. The cloth she'd been using to wipe the menu slipped from her fingers and hit the floor. Daniel stepped back. "He's outside. And unlike this room, he still has his dignity." And with that, Captain Daniel Boyd turned and walked toward the door. No applause followed, no cheers. Just the kind of silence that comes when a room full of people suddenly remembers what decency looks like and realizes painfully how far they had fallen short. The video didn't stay local. By that evening, it had been shared across Facebook, Twitter, and TikTok, racking up over 2 million views in less than 12 hours. A grainy clip just under a minute long showed a uniformed army officer confronting a waitress in a small-town diner. The line that struck the internet like lightning: "You judged a man by the grease on his fingers. Those fingers once pulled wounded men from burning wreckage." People watched, then rewatched, then shared. And with each post, more users asked the same thing: "Who is that man? And why does he look so familiar?" Local news stations picked up the story first, then regional outlets. Within a week, Franklin Boyd's quiet life in the background became something else entirely. Not because he asked for it, but because the world for once had finally stopped to look. Strangers began pulling into his gravel driveway just to shake his hand. Veterans he didn't know dropped off handwritten letters, some of them trembling with old injuries and older memories. A couple from 2 towns over left a box of tools on his porch with a note: "You reminded us of our father. Thank you for still standing." Kids who used to bring in their bikes to Franklin's garage now brought their parents. One teenage girl made a sign and taped it to his fence: "Real heroes don't wear capes, they carry wrenches." The internet followed. A hashtag appeared, "Reach Under Hands of Honor," and within days it was trending nationwide. Photos poured in from across the country, men and women with grease-stained hands with soot, with calluses, each of them saluting the screen or holding up signs that read, "I serve too." Others posted photos of their fathers and grandfathers in uniform, followed by snapshots of them decades later, working as mechanics, janitors, or carpenters. Franklin watched it all unfold in stunned silence, sitting on the same creaky porch swing he'd shared with his late wife, Sarah. He didn't own a smartphone, But his neighbor, Ms. Harper, printed out screenshots and brought him her iPad to scroll. When he first saw a video of a young Marine in Florida, quoting his son's speech word for word, Franklin just shook his head and whispered, "All that over these old hands." But the town noticed too. Maple Lane Diner, once a quiet stopover for commuters, found itself under fire. Hundreds of calls and reviews flooded in overnight. Many were angry, some were hopeful, but all asked the same thing: is the waitress still working there? She wasn't for long. Amber Collins was fired by noon the next day. The owner, a wiry man named Joe Marks, released a public apology that went viral on its own. But he didn't stop there. 2 weeks after the incident, Joe stood at a podium in front of a modest crowd outside his freshly repainted diner and announced, "This place was never about one person. It's about community. It's about respect. Starting today, we're changing the name to something that reflects those values." The tarp fell to reveal a new sign above the doorway, "Boyd's Table." Inside, a photo of Franklin in uniform now hung above the counter. Below it was a plaque that read, "In honor of the hands that built, protected, and never asked for thanks." The diner also launched a new tradition: free meals every Monday for veterans and working-class laborers. No questions asked. And Franklin, he didn't say much. He still opened his garage every morning, still made 2 cups of coffee, still kept that wrench close by. But when people waved at him now, he finally waved back. There's something strange about the way we treat work in America. We clap for uniforms on Veterans Day. We share quotes about sacrifice and freedom. But the day after, a man with grease on his hands walks into a diner, and half the room looks at him like he doesn't belong. Somehow, in the race to stay clean, polished, and picture perfect, we've started seeing labor as something lesser, something beneath us. But it isn't. Real heroism doesn't always walk in wearing medals or carrying flags. Sometimes it limps in quietly with a worn-out boot and oil-stained fingers, holding a wrench that once saved lives and later fixed a neighbor's brakes for free. Sometimes it says nothing at all because it never needed recognition to begin with. Franklin Boyd wasn't looking for praise. He was just trying to eat his breakfast. And yet, in the eyes of a young waitress, those hands, those same hands that kept machines running in the middle of war zones, weren't good enough for a plate of toast. It makes you wonder, how many stories have we missed because we were too busy judging someone by what they wore, by how they looked, by the dirt under their nails. We live in a time when youth is celebrated and aging is hidden behind filters. But people like Franklin remind us that age doesn't diminish worth, it deepens it. Every wrinkle, every scar, every callus carries history. Not the kind written in textbooks, but the kind that quietly holds the country together. Think about it. That janitor sweeping the school hallway, he may have built bridges in Afghanistan. That old man fixing a mower down the street, he might have pulled his friends out of a burning Humvee under enemy fire. That woman stocking shelves at the grocery store, she might have raised 3 kids while her husband deployed 4 times. They're around us every day, but because they aren't loud, because they don't ask to be seen, we pass them by. We assume we already know their story, or worse, that there isn't one. We measure value in ways that are too often shallow. Degrees on a wall, a clean shirt, a shiny resume. But none of those things can replace quiet resilience, or loyalty, or a lifetime of showing up when it counted most, even when no one was looking. Franklin's story isn't rare. What's rare is that someone finally stopped long enough to see it. So maybe it's time we ask ourselves something. Have you ever ignored someone with a story worth hearing? Was there a man at the bus stop whose hat you didn't look twice at? A neighbor with a limp you never asked about? A pair of dirty hands you dismissed too quickly? Because sometimes what looks like grease is actually a mark of pride, a memory, a legacy, the kind that never needed applause, only acknowledgement. Let's not wait for viral videos or military uniforms to remind us who the real heroes are. Let's start paying attention. Let's start asking, listening, respecting. And maybe next time you see someone with worn boots and tired hands, you'll pause before judging. You just might be looking at someone who carried more than you'll ever know. It started with an idea at a town council meeting, a modest proposal by Ms. Harper, the same neighbor who'd made the call that changed everything. This town doesn't need another fountain, she said. It needs a reminder. A month later, workers began pouring concrete in the corner of Heritage Park. Children watched through the fence as a crane lifted the final piece into place. And when the cloth finally came down, the town fell silent. There, cast in bronze and standing 6 feet tall, was a pair of hands. One hand gripped a worn wrench, strong and steady, with every wrinkle and scar faithfully sculpted. The other hand, open and raised, offered a military salute. No face, no body, just the hands. The plaque below read simply, "In honor of those who serve in silence." On the day of the dedication, the entire town gathered. Veterans stood shoulder to shoulder in the front row, some in faded jackets, some in full-dress blues. Teenagers sat beside their parents, many of them holding phones not to record, but to listen. Franklin Boyd stood at the podium, the sun catching on the edge of his glasses. He hadn't wanted to speak, but Daniel had placed a firm hand on his shoulder that morning and said, "They need to hear it from you." So he cleared his throat, voice low, but unwavering. "These hands may look dirty," he began, holding them up for all to see, "but they've only ever served in war, in peace, in grease and grit again. Not for medals, not for money, but because someone had to." He paused, looked out at the crowd. "And if I've learned anything, it's this: there's no such thing as small service. Only quiet ones. The kind you carry with you. The kind that never makes headlines. The kind that builds towns." When he stepped down, the applause was long and sustained, not thunderous but heartfelt. After the ceremony, a line formed. Dozens of grown men and women, some with families of their own, waited to speak to Franklin. They were the kids he'd helped fix bicycles, change oil patch brakes, and pass down life lessons between socket wrenches and silence. One man, now in his 30s, stood near the end of the line with his young daughter and simply said, "You were the first person who ever believed I could fix something." Franklin didn't say much. He just nodded, smiled, and gently patted the man's shoulder. Legacy isn't what you leave in a will. It's what you leave in people. Next time you see someone with tired hands, look twice. You might be looking at a hero. Not every veteran wears their story on their sleeve. Not every act of service comes with a parade. Some are written in scars, in silence, in the kind of wear that soap can't wash away. Franklin Boyd's story isn't just his. It's the story of thousands who gave everything, then came home and kept giving quietly. In a world so focused on appearances, we often miss what really matters. The man changing your tire, the woman bagging groceries with a limp, the neighbor who never talks much but shovels the sidewalk for everyone on the block. These people are not less than. They are the living legacy of service, sacrifice, and character. We built this channel to tell stories like Franklin's because someone needs to. Because beneath the noise of trending videos and short attention spans, there are still people out there holding this country together with work-worn hands and quiet dignity. Now we want to hear from you. Do you know someone like Franklin? Someone who served in silence, gave without asking, or lived a life of quiet impact? Share their story in the comments. Tell us who they are. Honor them. Let others see what you've seen. Your comment might inspire someone else to finally see what they've been overlooking for years. And if this story moved you, if it made you think differently about who we pass by every day, then please like this video, subscribe to our channel, share it with someone who still believes in quiet heroism, because these stories matter, and because the world needs reminding that a pair of tired hands might carry more honor than we ever imagined. Thanks for watching. We'll see you in the next one, with another story that speaks where others stay silent.